Have you ever walked past someone 100 times, only to realize one day you never truly saw them at all? They called her Miss Denise. Always Miss Denise. Never Denise Carter, never Mrs. Carter, never by her full name. Just Miss Denise, the janitor. The woman with the faded grey uniform, worn sneakers, and quiet steps. For 15 years, she scrubbed the floors, wiped their spills, picked up their crumbs, and carried the weight of their indifference. She was there when the sun had yet to rise, when the halls still echoed with silence, and the city outside was just starting to blink awake. In the towering glass fortress of Creswell Holdings, one of the South's most powerful logistics corporations, Denise was a ghost. An accessory, a piece of furniture. She moved silently through plush-carpeted hallways, pushed her mop down sterile boardroom corridors, and crouched in bathrooms with cracked tiles no one else dared to fix. To executives in tailored suits, Denise was less than a person. She was the shadow that cleaned up behind them. They laughed over million-dollar deals, barked orders, and sipped lattes while she wiped their messes, invisible in plain sight. They never asked where she came from, what her dreams were, or what she had lost. They didn't know her age. They didn't care if she had family. No birthday wishes, no Christmas greetings, not even a thank you when she stayed late to clean up after their parties. To them, Miss Denise was just the cleaning lady, the one who knew not to speak, not to look, not to exist beyond the walls she sanitized. But there was something they didn't know. Miss Denise had watched them, all of them. Every board meeting behind closed glass doors, every whispered conversation in the break room, every smirk, every scheme. She heard the jokes they cracked when they thought no one was listening. She noted the moments of cruelty dressed in fake smiles. She remembered the names of those who laughed when someone got laid off, and the exact words used when one manager told another, "She's just the janitor. Who cares?" They didn't know that behind those tired eyes and those worn sneakers was a memory like steel. They didn't know she kept track of everything, every word, every betrayal, every fraud. For 15 years they thought they were the architects of their empire. But the truth? The real foundation of Creswell Holdings walked their halls every morning. At 5:45 a.m. with a mop in her hand, she never raised her voice. She never fought back. Not yet, but that silence, oh, that silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice, a storm gathering behind calm eyes, the kind of silence that waits for the right moment to make the entire world stop. And when that day came, she didn't just mop the floor, she cleaned house. So the next time you see someone pushing a mop or picking up trash in your office, remember this. You might be looking at the real owner of the building. Long before anyone at Creswell Holdings ever called her Miss Denise, before the corridors echoed with the hollow sound of her mop bucket, Denise Carter sat at a battered wooden kitchen table in a cramped, overheated apartment just outside Columbus, Georgia. She wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform then. She didn't carry a spray bottle or wear rubber gloves. She wore a pencil behind one ear and a calculator in her left hand, eyes narrowed, scanning the fine print of a logistics permit. Sitting across from her, elbows planted firmly on the table, was her husband, Dwayne Johnson. Not the celebrity, not a bodybuilder, not a larger-than-life icon. This Dwayne was 53, wiry and calloused, a man who had spent 2 decades riding shotgun on delivery trucks through Alabama and South Carolina. He smelled like diesel, sweat, and possibility. A man who knew every shortcut on the Southern freight routes, but didn't know how to keep a ledger if his life depended on it. That was Denise's job, and she was damn good at it. They started small, so small it almost wasn't real. Just an idea scrawled on the back of a grocery store receipt. One late night, when their daughter had finally fallen asleep, and the hum of the fridge was the only sound left in the room. "What if," Dwayne had asked quietly, "we ran it ourselves?" Denise didn't laugh. She rarely did. Instead, she stared down at the receipt, then picked up her pen. Here's the part no one at Creswell Holdings ever bothered to learn. Denise Carter wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was the co-founder, the mind behind the balance sheets, the architect of the corporate shell that protected them from lawsuits, the one who, in those early days, read every contract 3 times, circled clauses in red ink, and set up a separate legal entity to shield their growing business from predatory vendors and shady partners. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She didn't demand recognition, but she was the reason the lights stayed on. In fact, it was Denise, quiet, calculating Denise, who made the ultimate gamble. One night, sitting under the flickering glow of their kitchen bulb, she pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a check, her entire inheritance, a modest sum left to her by her father, enough for a down payment on a decent house, enough to start over. But instead, she pushed the check across the table to Dwayne. "Put your name on the account," she said. "We'll register the company under your name. I'll handle the back end. No one needs to know I'm a partner. I trust you, and I trust this dream." She didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. Academic theorists often debate the psychology of invisible founders, those whose fingerprints mark every cornerstone of a business, yet are erased from the narrative as the spotlight chases only the loudest voices. Denise Carter was one of them. What's wild is this: while executives upstairs at Creswell later debated Q3 earnings over espresso, the woman who once built the company's founding paperwork by hand was scrubbing the exact floors where those meetings happened. They say power is never given, only taken. But Denise, she gave it away, voluntarily, almost poetically. Because for her it wasn't about credit. It was about building something that could outlast them both. Dwayne was the face, Denise was the force. He was charm, hustle, and iron-willed grit behind the wheel of their lone truck. She was structure, foresight, and the unyielding spine behind. Every growth decision, while he mapped routes and shook hands with freight managers, she stayed up filing tax forms, rewriting contracts, and creating protocols for asset separation. Something most small businesses overlook until it's too late. And what's most staggering? Creswell Holdings, yes, that Creswell, the behemoth with the chrome-plated logo and velvet boardrooms, was originally born in a kitchen with a cracked tile floor and one fax machine they borrowed from Dwayne's uncle. So the next time someone calls her just a janitor, let them try reconciling that with the woman who once calculated profit margins using nothing but a kitchen calculator and sheer conviction. These are the kinds of founders who vanish in corporate history, erased, not by accident but by design, because Denise didn't fit the image. She wasn't the charismatic pitchman. She wasn't male, loud, or white. She was a quiet, sharp-eyed black woman with a gift for numbers and a fire in her chest that never flickered, even when the wind howled hardest. When Dwayne looked at her that night, her inheritance on the table, her name willingly buried beneath the paperwork, he asked, "Are you sure?" Denise only smiled. "I know what I'm doing, and I trust you won't let me lose." In that moment, a dynasty was born. They started with a rented truck, 2 prepaid cell phones, and 3 fragile contracts from friends of friends. But by year 3, they were closing 6-figure deliveries, dominating regional routes, and being whispered about as the upstart taking Southern freight by storm. And Denise. She was still behind the curtain, running financial forecasts that would make Wall Street interns blush. She read insurance clauses like other people read novels. She negotiated lease terms with such precision that even seasoned brokers thought twice. But history has a funny way of favoring the boldest voice, not the wisest one. And as the glow of their success brightened, casting longer shadows, Denise, true to form, stepped back. She watched the empire rise, knowing full well that empires built without gratitude eventually crumble from within. Little did the new Creswell elite know, the woman they passed by in the hallway every morning, the one whose mop squeaked faintly. Behind them, she was the very reason they had a hallway to walk through at all, and she was just getting started. The rain fell hard that night, not in soft, romantic droplets, but in cruel sheets, slapping the windows as if the sky itself had turned against her. Denise Carter sat motionless in the living room, the TV flickering soundlessly in the corner as the phone in her hand grew cold. A single sentence kept looping in her head. There was an accident. Dwayne didn't make it. Just like that, it was over. The man she built everything with. Gone. Dwayne Johnson had been supervising a time-sensitive delivery on I-85. When the call came through, cargo was compromised. A driver missed a crucial checkpoint. He drove out in the middle of the storm, unwilling to let anything fall through the cracks. But the fog was thick, the roads slick. One blind curve, one exhausted trucker swerving just a few seconds too late. And the man Denise loved, her husband, her partner, her fire, was left in a mangled wreck on the side of the highway. They buried him 3 days later. It was the kind of funeral where no one cried loud enough to make others uncomfortable. Held in a marble chapel with plastic roses on the pews and bad coffee in the lobby. Curtis Banning, their old friend, co-founder of Creswell, the man who once shared ramen noodles with Dwayne in a studio apartment, stood at the podium and gave a speech so cold it felt like reading a quarterly report. He mentioned logistics routes. He mentioned market share. He did not mention Denise. In fact, no one did. She sat in the back row in a plain black dress, a brimmed hat, tilted just enough to hide her face. Not one of the board members recognized her. Not one of Dwayne's new partners turned around. They whispered to each other about the future of Creswell Holdings, about contracts, restructuring, and potential mergers. She was invisible. Again. Even in grief, even when she should have been front and center, Denise was treated like background noise, and in that moment, something inside her began to splinter. Denise didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She didn't ask why. She simply went home, opened her filing cabinet, and began reading every document Dwayne had ever signed. And that's where the real betrayal began. In the weeks that followed, Curtis Banning made his move. While the ink on Dwayne's death certificate was still drying, Curtis met privately with board members. He updated incorporation documents, reassigned stock holdings, changed passwords. He didn't just freeze Denise out, he buried her. Quietly, legally, deliberately. One morning, she went to her office at Creswell's old headquarters, only to find the locks changed. Her name removed from directories, access revoked, no explanation, no warning, no call. And here's what most people don't know about that kind of betrayal. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in silence. It's a slow, choking theft, paper by paper, key by key. Every part of Denise's identity inside the company was erased, not by force, but by omission. It was almost poetic how precise the erasure was. Curtis hadn't just removed her from payroll. He had voided her role in financial access, shut down the legal entity she had created with Dwayne, and shifted ownership into a holding trust that conveniently excluded her name. It was as if she had never existed. What's even more bizarre, Denise had seen this coming. Not the exact method, but the possibility. She always feared Curtis might one day choose power over loyalty, that his hunger for respect among Creswell's new investors would outweigh his gratitude toward the people who built it from nothing. Academic literature often refers to transitional betrayal, a term used when allies become threats. The moment the original visionary is gone, Curtis didn't just survive Dwayne's death, he leveraged it. Still, Denise didn't sue. She didn't storm into the building and demand justice, because she knew, deep in her bones, that some battles are not won with courtroom filings, Some wars require time, silence, and the kind of patience only someone who's already lost everything can understand. So Denise retreated. She returned to the apartment they once shared. She cooked the same meals Dwayne loved. She sat by the window. At night, holding the original notarized copies of Creswell's founding agreements. She kept them in a black envelope, and every evening she reread them, like a prayer, like a vow. Curtis thought she had vanished. The board assumed she was just a grieving widow with no power left to her name. They believed wrongly that Denise Carter was the kind of woman who would quietly slip away and accept her fate. They were wrong, because buried under that silence was strategy. Underneath her sorrow was steel, and in that filing cabinet, tucked away among death certificates and broken dreams, was the very evidence that would one day burn everything Curtis had built to the ground. Denise let them forget her. She watched from the shadows as they toasted quarterly wins and patted themselves on the back for weathering the storm after Dwayne's passing. They didn't know that just miles away, in a dim apartment lit only by a desk lamp, the real storm was. Being prepared, one legal clause, one timestamp, one betrayal at a time. They thought she was done, but Denise Carter was just getting started. The job posting was almost laughably simple. Night shift janitorial staff needed, entry level, no prior experience required, corporate headquarters, immediate start. Most people would have walked past the flyer without a second glance, but Denise Carter stood still, staring at it like it was fate itself reaching out to her. The company address at the bottom wasn't just familiar. It was sacred. It was the place where her heart had once lived, and where it had been shattered. Creswell Holdings. They had erased her name from the records, locked her out, cast her into the shadows. So she chose to become the shadow. Denise applied under the name Lena Johnson. She used an old friend's mailing address, wore clothes 2 sizes too big, claimed a background of rural labor jobs and part-time housekeeping gigs. Her resume was forgettable by design. The interview, conducted by a young, overworked HR assistant who barely looked up from her clipboard, lasted 6 minutes. There were no background checks. No one remembered her face, because no one ever really looked at janitors. 3 days later, she received a call. "Miss Johnson, welcome to Creswell Holdings. You start Monday night." That night, Denise didn't sleep, not from nerves, but from adrenaline, from purpose. For the first time in years, she had a way back inside, not as an owner, not even as an employee with a nameplate, but as a ghost, an invisible witness who would walk the same halls they once built together. She didn't need a corner office. She only needed access. What's strange and utterly ironic is how easy it is to become invisible in a building you once helped design. On her first shift, Denise stepped into the newly renovated lobby, greeted not by reverence, but by the dull, mindless chatter of interns and the cold buzz of fluorescent lights. No one turned. No one gasped. To them, she was just another cleaning lady in grey polyester pushing a mop. She passed a framed portrait of the company founders. There was Curtis, smiling smugly in a navy suit, Dwayne, caught mid-laugh, and an empty space where her face should have been. Those who talk about symbolic invisibility in social structures often forget how literal it can feel. Denise was staring at the company she co-founded from the position of someone cleaning its floors. And no one, not even the receptionist, recognized her. Curtis walked by her on the 3rd day. He didn't pause. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His graying hair was slicked back. His gut had thickened with age and indulgence. He was surrounded by 2 young assistants who laughed at every dry joke he cracked. One of them said, "Mr. Banning, how do you keep your memory so sharp?" And Curtis replied with a smirk, "Because I never clutter it with names that don't matter." Denise's grip on the mop tightened. Still, she said nothing. She watched and listened, and every night after her shift ended, she went home and wrote. In a small black notebook, she documented everything: Who said what? Which floor? What time? Every arrogant joke, every policy decision whispered in hallways, every conversation about slashing bonuses or denying overtime pay. She logged it all, like a war strategist building her battlefield. She also studied the new faces. One in particular stood out. Thomas Wexler, Creswell's new CEO, young, sharp, charming, in the way corporate media loves. But underneath the polished exterior was a man addicted to perception, obsessed with control. Wexler talked fast, moved fast, and made decisions even faster. The kind of leader who valued aesthetics over ethics. To him, employees were numbers, costs to be trimmed, pains to be managed, assets to be silenced. And to Denise, he was a red flag in a three-piece suit. What's bizarre, Denise had more access as a janitor than she ever did as a silent partner. The execs didn't filter themselves in front of her. She was just Miss Denise, a background character, no threat, no witness. She'd stand in a hallway cleaning a spill while two senior managers argued over who to fire next. She'd mop the edge of the boardroom as Wexler laughed about hiding bonuses in shell invoices. She became the fly on the wall with a memory like a vault, but beneath her composure was something else growing, something sharper than resentment. Purpose. She'd see younger janitors like Cynthia Moore, girls barely out of high school, crying in the locker room because their child was sick and management refused to reschedule a shift. She'd see men, like Terence Doyle, a warehouse supervisor with 20 years of service, suddenly fired with no severance for restructuring, only to be replaced by a manager's cousin, and Denise said nothing. Not yet, because vengeance is loud. But justice is quiet, precise, patient. The kind of thing that moves in the dark, collecting facts, stacking truths, waiting for the perfect moment to rise. Not as revenge, but as reckoning. Academic thinkers often ask, can one woman shift an entire power structure from the bottom? Most scoff, but Denise wasn't interested in theories. She was writing a case study in real time. For 15 years, she walked those floors, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a surgeon prepping for a surgery that no one else had the courage or the access to perform. What others saw as mop water, she saw as reflection of who they had become and who she was destined to be again. And still, no one knew. The cleaning lady with her head down, her back bent, her sneakers worn to the bone. She was the beginning, and one day she would be the end. They thought she was just cleaning, that each stroke of her mop was just maintenance, that every hour she spent alone in a hallway, every late night, shift passed under dim security lights, was simply time ticking away on a janitor's clock. But Denise Carter wasn't wiping floors. She was building a case every night, while Creswell Holdings slumbered in the glow of its own self-importance. Denise was wide awake, and not just physically. She was awake in the deeper sense, the kind of alertness that comes from heartbreak, injustice, and a quiet vow whispered in the dark. One day, they'll answer for this. In 15 years, she never missed a beat. While the company's senior leadership changed suits and titles, while Wexler strutted down corridors spewing words like optimization and liquidation, Denise was listening, observing, writing. Every hallway had ears, every copy room had cracks, and every executive's arrogance was a gift because none of them realized the woman bending over to clean their mess was also documenting their moral collapse. Her black notebook became her second life. Each entry began the same way: date, time, location, names present. Then came the truth. Raw, unfiltered. March 17th, 11:42 p.m., break room. Meredith Chandler to assistant. Don't log the bonuses, just shift them to project overheads. No one audits it. April 4th, 2:18 a.m., executive lounge. Wexler. We cut overtime again. If they complain, we'll call it restructuring. Let legal draft the memo. This wasn't just note-taking, it was excavation. What's shocking is how often the worst secrets were shared in front of her, as if Denise's grey uniform made her mute, as if the moment you wear latex gloves and roll a janitor's cart, your ability to comprehend nuance disappears. There's something eerily academic about this form of erasure, how systems condition people to believe laborers are not people, but tools, objects, set pieces. But Denise remembered everything. She had built Creswell's financial backbone once. She could certainly reverse engineer its internal rot. She noticed irregular expense reports. She took photos of invoices left on desks. She overheard phone calls about phantom vendor payments. She gathered hard copies from trash bins and shredded documents carelessly discarded near the mailroom. What they called confidential, she called evidence. And all the while her face never changed. Not when Curtis passed her in the hallway. Not when Thomas Wexler tossed his coffee cup near her mop bucket and muttered, "If I paid you double, would you actually clean right for once?" Not even when board members whispered racial slurs behind closed doors, believing the janitor outside couldn't hear. Denise heard, and she remembered. What most people forget is that silence can be louder than shouting, that someone who watches and waits day after day, year after year, can one day hold more power than an entire boardroom full of executives, because time, when combined with truth, is the sharpest weapon of all. Somewhere in the third year, Denise began storing evidence externally. She used old USB drives, encrypted files, even mailed copies to a trusted attorney, Elliot Miles, who had handled Dwayne's estate years ago. Elliot didn't ask questions. He knew better. He simply catalogued everything she sent, like an archivist preparing for the war no one else saw coming. One of the most heartbreaking entries was dated September 2nd, Year 7. It read, "Cynthia Moore, age 22, janitor, first child in ICU after a car accident. Asked for one shift off, denied. HR policy updated same day to require 72-hour notice. Cynthia wept in locker room. No one came to help. Denise underlined that entry 3 times. In Cynthia's face, she saw herself, 2 decades younger, still believing that hard work alone could open doors. She knew then, this company wasn't just corrupt. It was designed to manufacture silence, to crush dignity, to keep people like Cynthia too tired, too scared, and too underpaid to ever fight back. What's strange is how no one questioned Denise's presence. She was just always there, cleaning up the meeting room at midnight, fixing the smudges on the conference glass, standing outside bathrooms during investor visits. Miss Denise, the building's friendly ghost, always invisible, always dependable. Some nights she wept, not from pain, but from restraint, because every bone in her body wanted to scream the truth, to barge into Wexler's office, throw the documents on his desk, and demand justice. But Denise had learned long ago that justice delivered too early is easily dismissed. But justice delivered right, when it's undeniable, unavoidable, and, backed by years of irrefutable evidence, is a reckoning. Academic thinkers might argue, why didn't she act sooner? Because Denise understood power, not just how it was held, but how it was transferred, and she knew that exposing a system like Creswell's required not just proof, but timing. The precise moment when every lie, every cut corner, and every abuse would become undeniable, even to those who once benefited from it. 15 years passed like this. Every shift she worked, every floor she mopped, every whisper she overheard became part of the dossier she was building. Not a vendetta, but a mirror, one that would one day show the leaders of Creswell Holdings exactly what they had become. And still, no one knew. Miss Denise, the janitor, with her soft voice and tired shoes, always polite, always quiet, until the day she wouldn't be. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that began with stale coffee and low morale, when the hallway lights buzzed louder than the voices of the employees trudging through another week of being ignored. At 2:58 p.m., the boardroom on the 8th floor was polished to a mirror sheen, just as requested. Denise Carter had scrubbed every corner of the carpet, wiped the smudges from the chrome chair legs, and made sure not a single crumb marred the mahogany table. She didn't miss a detail. Not today. 2 minutes before the quarterly board meeting, Thomas Wexler appeared in the hallway. He was laughing, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten slice of birthday cake. His suit was pristine, his tie bold. He looked like he owned the world. Then he stopped in front of Denise, leaned slightly, and let the cake fall. The frosting splattered across the freshly cleaned carpet. "Oops," he smirked. "Miss Denise, looks like you missed a spot." His voice dipped, just enough to be cruel. "Think you can handle it? Or should we call in someone who actually knows how to clean?" Denise didn't react. She bent down, calmly picked up the plate, and wiped the floor in silence. But that wasn't the moment that broke her. It came seconds later, when Wexler narrowed his eyes and added, "Sometimes I wonder if you people just clock in to steal hours. You know, if I paid you more, would you actually do the job right? Or is mediocrity just part of the uniform?" The hallway grew silent. A few employees nearby froze. No one spoke, no one dared to. Denise stood up slowly. Her eyes locked with Wexler's, not with anger, but with something colder, deeper. She said, "This floor will be spotless, Mr. Wexler, just like every record you've tried to hide." It was the first time in years anyone had heard her say more than a sentence. Academic theorists often propose that institutional change begins with sudden disruption. But what they don't study enough are the people who become that disruption, quietly, methodically, and on their own terms. That night, Denise didn't go home. She went to her basement locker, pulled out a USB drive from beneath a false panel, and walked out of the building. At exactly 11:37 p.m., she called Elliot Miles, her attorney. Her voice was steady, calm, surgical. "It's time," she said, "prepare the motion." Within hours, Elliot filed a request to convene an emergency shareholders meeting under the bylaws, one that didn't need Wexler's permission. The proof was airtight. Denise still held majority control of the original founder shares, inherited legally from her husband, Dwayne Johnson. And the folder Elliot submitted. It wasn't just thick with papers, it was heavy with truth. By 9:45 the next morning, the Creswell Holdings executive team was summoned to the boardroom. Wexler assumed it was just another performance review. He adjusted his cufflinks, gave his usual smug nod to Curtis Banning, who now sat on the board in a senior advisory role, and took his seat at the head of the table. At exactly 10 a.m., the doors opened. In walked Denise Carter, no longer in grey uniform, but in a sharp navy blue blazer, crisp slacks and polished black shoes. Her hair was pulled back, her expression unreadable. Beside her walked Elliot Miles, briefcase in hand. Wexler squinted. "Excuse me, this is a closed meeting. Cleaning crews come in afterward." Elliot calmly stepped forward. "Correction. This is an emergency shareholders meeting called under Clause 9B of the corporate charter by the majority stakeholder Denise Carter, co-founder of Creswell Holdings." Curtis's face paled. The room fell to a hush. Denise stepped forward and laid a black binder on the table. "I'm not here for a debate," she said. "I'm here with facts. For 15 years, I've been listening, watching, and recording every instance of misconduct, corruption, and cruelty that stained this company. Today I'm done cleaning up after you." She opened the binder. Inside were payroll logs showing manipulated bonuses, internal emails discussing illegal terminations, photographs of forged invoices, and audio files, dozens of them, of board members discussing how to slash costs by exploiting lower-tier employees. "This company was founded in my kitchen," Denise said, her voice gaining weight. My husband drove the trucks. I wrote the contracts. I funded the launch with everything I had. But you, she looked straight at Curtis, stole it. Curtis stammered, That's not how. She cut him off. You changed. The locks. You silenced my name. You made me disappear, thinking no one would remember a woman in the shadows. She turned to Wexler. You thought I was a ghost, but I've been more present than any of you, because ghosts, they don't just haunt, they witness. Elliot placed a stack of legal documents in front of each board member. These are notices of removal. Effective immediately, Mr. Thomas Wexler is stripped of executive authority. Curtis Banning is relieved of advisory control. The majority of shareholder votes have been pre-secured. A new vote of no confidence will proceed. Denise didn't yell. She didn't gloat. She simply looked each person in the eye, as if seeing them for the first time. Not as leaders, but as cowards in expensive suits. You thought I was just a janitor, but I was always the architect, and now I've come to rebuild, without the rot. As security arrived to escort Wexler out, he barked, This is insanity. You can't do this. But no one backed him. No one looked him in the eye. He left the room in silence, and just like that, the most powerful man in the company was undone. Not by scandal, not by rivals, but by the quiet woman who had once scrubbed his footprints off the boardroom floor. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you never bothered to see. The room had never felt this quiet. Not in all its years hosting quarterly earnings calls, executive brunches, or stockholder ceremonies. The tension had vanished. Not because it had been resolved, but because it had been exposed. Denise Carter stood at the head of the Creswell Holdings boardroom, not as a janitor, not as a widow, but as the rightful steward of everything these walls were supposed to mean. The leather chairs were still warm from those just ousted. Papers still rustled under air vents. No applause followed her final declaration. Only a silence that felt like breath, being held by history itself. And then she said the most unexpected and thing of all. I'm not here to punish you, she began, her voice low but unshakable. I'm here to rebuild what we broke, what I let break when I stayed silent too long. Most in the room didn't know where to look. A few lowered their eyes, unsure if shame or shock was appropriate. But the young ones, the quiet analysts, the overworked coordinators, the assistants who had sat through meetings scribbling notes for men who never read them, they looked up and they listened. Academic theorists sometimes talk about inverse ascension, the process where those from the lowest rungs of an institution rise, not by climbing, but by waiting for the ladder to collapse under its own corruption. Denise Carter didn't climb over anyone to get here. She waited until the rot gave way and simply walked forward through the ashes. Her first official act as interim CEO wasn't to appoint new executives. It wasn't to throw lavish press conferences or hold PR summits. It was to announce an all-hands meeting, one that required every employee to attend, from top-floor directors to warehouse loaders to overnight custodians. No titles, no special seating. On Monday morning, the largest auditorium at Creswell Holdings filled to the brim. Some came out of fear, some came with curiosity, and others came just to see if the rumors were true. Was Miss Denise really in charge? When she walked on stage, wearing that same navy blazer, no podium in front of her, no slideshow behind her, just a mic clipped to her lapel and her black notebook in hand, the air changed. People didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they stared, because standing in front of them was a woman they had ignored, underestimated, even mocked, and now she had the floor. I know most of you don't know who I really am, Denise began. Some of you only know me as the lady who mopped the floors, and for 15 years I let you believe that. She paused. But I wasn't just cleaning. I was watching, listening, and remembering every moment this place forgot its own people. What followed wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning layered in grace. She read off names: Terence Doyle, Cynthia Moore, Alonzo Green, Deborah Williams. Each name came with a story. A termination, a withheld bonus, a sick child, a promise broken. "I've kept a record," Denise said, "not to shame you, but to make sure you never look away again." Then came the reform announcements. Effective immediately, all back pay for denied overtime in the past 2 quarters will be processed and issued by Friday. Whispers rippled through the room. All insurance policies will be reviewed in public forums. You will choose your healthcare providers, not someone in an office who's never met your family. A stunned silence. Terminations made over the past 3 years without cause will be reviewed. If you were forced out unfairly, we will make it right, or at least start with your name, your dignity, and your story. And then, something that no one expected: "I'm dissolving the private dining room," the upper management gasped. That space will become a shared break area. No more velvet rope sections for those who've forgotten how many hands it takes to move a single package. A man in the back, the same driver who once handed Denise a half-eaten sandwich without looking her in the eye, lowered his head. Another woman in HR quietly wept. Not because she was being scolded, but because she realized, maybe for the first time, someone finally saw her. Here's something strange about justice. When it finally arrives, it doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like stillness, like truth settling into the walls of a place that has resisted it for too long. The academic world may label this moral reconstitution, but Denise called it something simpler: doing what we should have done from the start. She didn't leave the meeting with fanfare. She didn't get mobbed. She sat down with a few maintenance staff afterward, shared coffee in the break room, checked on Cynthia's son, who was still recovering, and handed out feedback cards to every department. And the strangest thing, people filled them out, earnestly, honestly, because they had never been asked before. Of course, not everyone welcomed this new era. Some from the old guard rolled their eyes, muttered about soft leadership, and quietly began forming alliances to stall her reforms. But Denise had lived in their shadows too long to fear their tactics. She anticipated every underhanded email. She countered every delay with transparency. When anonymous complaints were filed questioning her experience, Denise responded with a spreadsheet detailing the company's financials from inception to present, highlighting where and how money was lost under Wexler's command and where it would be saved by her restructuring. Every line item cross-checked, every policy justified. In a closed-door meeting with resistant executives, she delivered a simple line: "If the truth makes you uncomfortable, you're probably one of the reasons we lost our way." That line was never printed in any official memo, but it echoed through the building. Denise didn't just fix policies. She rebuilt a culture, one conversation at a time. She brought back the appreciation lunch, reopened the staff lounge, rehired 3 unjustly terminated employees. And perhaps most powerfully of all, she listened, because Denise Carter had never wanted revenge. She wanted repair. And for the first time in 15 years, the company she once built, not with fanfare, but with faith, was finally starting to look like a place worth building again. Some endings don't come with applause. They come with whispers, soft, stunned, and laced with reverence. On a crisp Friday morning, Denise Carter arrived early at Creswell Holdings, as she always had for nearly 2 decades. But this time, she wasn't pushing a mop bucket or wheeling a yellow cart. She walked through the revolving doors wearing a deep burgundy coat, a simple pendant around her neck, and a binder tucked beneath her arm, not of cleaning schedules, but of new policy drafts. Employees didn't rush to bow or scatter. They looked up. They greeted her. Some even smiled. The transformation was subtle but profound. Creswell Holdings had become something it hadn't been in years: human. Denise paused in the lobby, gazing at the company's wall of portraits, formerly reserved for executives. One frame, until recently blank, now held a photo of Dwayne Johnson, her husband. 53, the co-founder who died too soon, whose name was once scrubbed from every legal file. And beside it finally another frame, hers, black and white, unadorned, but unmistakably her. For 15 years they called her Miss Denise, the cleaning lady, the ghost, the nobody. But now Creswell had remembered, and so had the world. The media storm was unexpected. Local news first, then national. Janitor reclaims empire. The hidden founder. 15 years in silence, one woman's fight for justice. Her story spread like wildfire, not because it was loud, but because it was true, authentic. Raw reporters asked, "Why didn't you act sooner?" Denise always answered the same way: power means nothing unless it's used at the right time. Academic thinkers have long debated the idea of asymmetric agency, how those at the margins of a system can, with enough patience and access, upend hierarchies without ever appearing on the radar. Denise Carter was no longer a theory. She was the proof. A woman who let an empire forget her, only so she could return and rebuild it without them realizing, until it was too late. But Denise never boasted. She never sought revenge tours or public apologies. Instead, she focused on what had always mattered most to her: the people, those who never had a voice, the forgotten ones. The janitors, drivers, warehouse clerks, and admin staff who had been trampled under Creswell's weight. In her new role, not as CEO, but as chair of ethical oversight, a title she insisted on creating, she walked every floor of the building weekly. She knew everyone's name, not because it made her look good, but because it was what they all deserved. At lunch, she'd sit beside Cynthia Moore, now supervisor of facilities, and ask about her son's recovery. She'd chat with Alonzo Green, the veteran driver who'd slept in his truck during layoffs, now promoted to head of fleet operations. She brought cookies for the overnight team. No cameras, no tweets. Just the kind of leadership people stopped believing existed, and the most powerful symbol of this new chapter. Denise kept her old janitor badge pinned to her office corkboard, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a monument to the invisible, strength it took to wait. One afternoon, after a routine staff meeting, a junior manager stood awkwardly by her office door. His name was Raphael, mid-20s, nervous. He finally asked, "Miss Carter, how did you stand it for so long, 15 years? Denise smiled, not out of pride but reflection. "Because I knew the truth, and truth always outlasts lies. You just have to live long enough to say it out loud." Perhaps the most unexpected moment came on the anniversary of Dwayne's death. Creswell held a memorial, not out of obligation, but because employees themselves organized it. Not a CEO-led event, not a shareholder-driven PR stunt. Just a courtyard gathering, folding chairs, music, laughter, real remembrance. Alonzo stood up with a toast. To all those who were called invisible, when in truth they were the foundation. This company didn't just rise on strategy, it rose. On the backs of people no one saw, like Denise. The crowd lifted their glasses, some with tears, others with quiet awe, even former skeptics, those who once mocked her, doubted her, or denied her, found themselves reflecting. Because Denise hadn't just rewritten policy, she had rewritten the emotional DNA of an entire institution. What makes this ending so wild isn't just the twist, it's that the twist never needed to be so dramatic if people had just seen her to begin with. But maybe that's the tragedy. We all live with, we only see heroes after they've survived the fire. And Denise She didn't just survive it, she walked through it for 15 years, carrying evidence, memories, and stories in her hands, waiting for the day when justice wasn't a luxury but a necessity. So the next time you see someone pushing a cart, mopping a floor, picking up what others leave behind, look again, because you might be looking at the person who once built the place you're standing in, and they just might be preparing to reclaim it. Denise Carter's story isn't just about justice, it's about memory, patience, and never underestimating the quietest person in the room. So tell me this, have you ever been underestimated? Ever been made to feel invisible because of your job, your skin, your silence? What would you do if the truth was finally in your hands? Leave your answer in the comments. Your story might be the next one that needs to be heard. And if this story moved you, like it moved all of us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the shadows are full of stories like Denise's, and we're here to bring them into the light. They wanted to name the building after her. A gleaming silver plaque, a media event, maybe even balloons. But Denise Carter said no. I don't need my name on glass, she said quietly. I need it remembered in people. By then, she could have had anything. A $2 million bonus, a permanent board seat, a memoir deal. Tech publications flooded her inbox. The janitor who outsmarted a Fortune 500. From mop to mansion. She waited 15 years. Now she runs the empire. But that was never her goal, because Denise Carter didn't come back for revenge. She came back to reclaim the soul of something she and Dwayne had once built with calloused hands and sleepless nights. That soul wasn't a brand. It wasn't equity or expansion or earnings calls. It was dignity. Dwayne once told her, back in the early days when they couldn't afford insurance, let alone employees, "If we ever grow, promise me we'll never treat people like tools." And Denise had promised. Then she watched for 15 long years as that promise was broken in her name. That was the final betrayal. So instead of plaques and honors, she asked for something else. "I want every employee, from entry level to executive, to write down one person they overlooked this year," she said during an internal video call. An odd request. But within a week, the anonymous portal she set up overflowed with names and stories. A warehouse temp who'd caught a safety hazard before it became a fire. A receptionist who covered 3 roles but was never promoted. A night shift driver who helped a family stranded on the freeway and never told anyone. Denise read every submission, all 1,487 of them. Then she did something no one expected. She used her discretionary fund to establish what she called the overlooked grant. $100,000, not to reward executives, but to invest in those written about by their peers. It didn't matter if they were full-time, part-time, or contract. If someone noticed their kindness, their sacrifice, their unseen effort, they qualified. "This is what legacy looks like," she said in an interview. "Not recognition for the loudest, but restoration for the forgotten." And the twist? She never accepted a penny from Creswell's profits again. Instead, she funneled her earnings into creating the Dwayne and Denise Foundation, dedicated to financial literacy, legal access, and startup grants for working-class entrepreneurs. People like her and Dwayne sitting at a kitchen table once. Upon a time, armed with dreams and $2 calculators. Some called it radical, others called it brilliant. Academics coined a phrase for it, compassionate infrastructure. The idea that policy can be engineered not just for efficiency, but for empathy. But Denise didn't care about the theory. She cared about results. 3 years later, Creswell's internal culture became a case study at Wharton. Its ethics audit was one of the first to pass with full marks. And Denise, still refusing a desk at HQ, kept her tiny office in the staff wellness wing. The sign outside simply read, community director. New interns assumed she was a volunteer until she opened her mouth. What's wild is how often new hires would stumble across her and, after a brief conversation, whisper to each other. Wait, was that the Denise Carter? And those who had been there longest would simply nod. Yep, that's her. She had become something bigger than a founder. She was the ghost who came back not to haunt, but to heal. There was one more surprise. Years after her reforms, Denise returned to the company archives. She sat alone with a box labeled Creswell Holdings, 1991, founding documents. Inside were the original contracts, handwritten notes, Dwayne's doodles in the margins, and taped to the last page was something she had forgotten entirely. Tiny post-it, yellowed with age in Dwayne's messy handwriting. If we lose each other, find your way back to what we built. That's where we'll always be. She smiled. Legacy, after all, is not a nameplate. It's a promise kept, and Denise Carter, founder, janitor, widow, warrior, kept hers better than anyone ever could have imagined. So next time you pass someone in a hallway, someone who doesn't speak much, someone whose name you don't know, ask yourself this. What story are you ignoring? What founder is still hiding in plain sight? And more importantly, what promise are you leaving behind? If Denise Carter's story moved you, share it, because there are thousands of others like her, and maybe one of them is watching, waiting, cleaning a floor, ready to reclaim the future. Like, comment, subscribe, because the shadows aren't empty, they're just waiting for someone to see.